I appreciate all of you for sticking with me so far. Today's lesson is going to be about how we add information to a child table. If you recall, we have two tables. We have a lessons table and we have a messages table. And a lesson can have many messages. A message can't exist by itself. It has to be tied to a lesson. And we did that through a foreign key that we created. And what this key basically is we created a field called lesson ID, and it references the ID field in the lessons table right here. And actually, probably something we should have done is we probably should have made this not nullable. That is pretty standard. That's pretty standard. That means that there's no way that this field can be left blank. It has to be filled in, and that's probably a good thing that we add this not nullable to it. So let's do that right away. Let's add that, and because we're making a change to our table, that requires that we rerun a migration. If you recall, a migration is what we ran after we first created this. We ran a migration that actually created this table over here. Well, now we just made a change to the structure of the table, meaning that any of the data that we've entered into the table is going to get wiped out because we didn't back this information up first. But that's okay. This information that we put in here has just been our own test data. So add this field to your migration file under migrations. If you click and you add the migration, add a not nullable to your lesson ID chain here and save it. And then we're going to have to roll back the previous migration and then rerun it again to create the table with this new constraint. So in order to do that, we go to our terminal. I probably should kill the server. I don't know, just to be safe, I'll stop the server. So I'll stop the server on a Mac. You hit Control C. I think on a Windows computer, it's also Control C as well. So because we made a change, we have to do a rollback. In order to do that, if you've installed connects globally, then you just type connects migrate rollback, enter, and that'll roll it back. If you haven't installed connects globally, then you can type npx connects migrate rollback. And you can look at the documentation on how to install connects globally if you want to do that. If you install it globally, you don't have to put this npx in front of it. But it works the same. So let's run this npx connects migrate rollback. That will wipe out this table and reset, and then we're going to have to run the latest again, and then that'll reset this table. So let's run this first command first. And that just batch one rolled back, one migration. So it rolled back everything in here using this down here, this down file. And now that we've rolled back all our changes, now we have to recreate our table again with the new changes. And so to do that, we type npx connects migrate latest. And that's the latest change we made. And we hit enter. Oh, did I mistype it? Let me see. Not nullable. Oh, maybe I misspelled not nullable. Not nullable might be with a capital N. You know what? I'm going to let the linter help me spell that. So if I do not, yeah, it was with a capital N. So that's my bad. With a capital N. Let's do that. Save that again. We might have to run the rollback again. Let's just try that. npx connects migrate rollback. Okay, so it says right here already at the base migration, so we didn't have to redo that rollback. So now that we made that change, we do npx connects migrate latest, and we'll hit enter. And there, it reran that migration. So now our messages table we've added a constraint that this foreign key field cannot be left null. There should be no instance where we have a message that isn't tied to a lesson. And if you want to go, you can stop the video and go open up SQLite, and then you would have to refresh your database schemas. Here, let me show you how to do that real quick, actually. Let me see. SQLite Studio. I'll show you how to do that. So you would be in the table that you're in, I think messages. Yeah, so you would go up to the top and click database, refresh all database schemas. That'll refresh your database if you wanted to look at it. But let's go back to the code base here. All right, so we've added a not nullable, and there's another thing that we need to do is we need to make a change to our connects file that will enforce this relationship between these two tables, this foreign key relationship. And connects file, and let me see. I don't remember it off the top of my head. You know what? I got it in another branch. Let me go quickly check to another branch. Git checkout messages, and then let me go to connects file. Let me see. Oh, it wants me to commit my changes before. All right. So let me, before you can change from one branch to another, if you have anything that you haven't committed, you have to make a commit first. So let's just make a commit. Let me just go over here and do this the quick way. Re-added not nullable constraint to messages foreign key. 2 characters. I'll just take off add. There we go. That and push. There. Now we've got our changes. Now I can do a git. You don't have to follow this part right here. This is where I'm going to get. Let me explain what I'm doing. We have to add some lines to our connects file that's going to enforce the foreign key relationship between a parent table and a child table. And I don't remember off the top of my head what that code snippet looks like, but I know where to go get it. So let me see. Checkout. And I'm going to go get it right here, and this is it right here. And I'll explain it. Control C. So just, you don't have to follow along right now. And copy that. Let me now do a git checkout back. Git checkout master to switch back to our branch that we're working on. All right. So in our connects file, we have to describe our database a little bit more. After the use null as default, which I mistakenly in an earlier video had outside of this curly brace, so hopefully you've moved it back in. It should be, there's no magic to this order. You can move this up here. You can move them anywhere, really. If you move it up there, you have to add a comma, though, after every key value pair. But after the next one, I'm going to add this in here. And you can pause the video and type this code in. You got to have a comma after your connection, and then you want a new key value pair. And the new key value pair, the key is pool, and the value is an object. And then it's going to run this callback after this database mounts, then it's going to run this callback. And what it basically is you can go look at the Connects documentation if you want to read up on it. But basically, in plain man speak, this is going to enforce foreign key relationship between our tables. And if you don't put this little snippet of code, your database could get messy real quick, where you might have records in child tables that aren't linked properly to parent tables. I hope that makes sense. So anyway, pause the video, type this code in, and then save the file, and then maybe make a commit. Well, let's just make a commit right here. I'll added pool to connects file, and I'll click that plus right there. Click that check mark. Push. Okay. Now that we've done that, we can go back to the talking about this table. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to create a post where we make a new message. And what we have to do is we have to specify somehow what lesson ID it's tied to, and then we have to specify a sender and a text. So we need to specify a sender, a message, and a lesson ID somehow. So let's start with, let me close some of this here so get a little bit more screen. Let's start with our helper. Let's write the helper first. And so let's create a, let's go up to the top. Let's create an add message function. This is going to add a new message, and we'll go down to the bottom. And if remember from our other add, it's an asynchronous operation. So let's just copy this right here as our guide. Copy that one. Paste it down here. We're going to change this. We're going to change this to add message. Let's get rid of all this stuff in here so we can, and we're going to do const ID equals await database. We're not going to make a post to the lessons table. We're going to make a post to the messages table. And we're going to insert a message. So we're going to have to pass in here a message, which we're going to put on the rec.body. When we do Insomnia, we're going to create a JSON object where we pass that, and we're also going to have to let it know of the ID of the parent, of which the parent table is the lessons table. We're going to have to pass an ID. And so to do that, we're going to have a lesson ID. And so right here, this would insert a message. We have to put message, insert message. But we have to put a where statement in here that will kind of link up the lesson, the message to the lessons table. And we just put, before our insert, we're going to put a where. And this is in the Connects documentation. If you go to connectsjs.org, you can look at a where statement and see all these different examples of how to do a where. But I'm just going to show you right here. So where the lesson ID, let's go back, whoops, not there. Let's go to the, where the lesson ID here is equal to the ID we passed in here. And since we named it the same, we can just say we're lesson ID. And then we're going to insert the message. And then this find by ID was a function that we wrote just for the lessons. We should probably maybe write a find message by ID. We can write that and then return that. So let's write that one real quick. Let's put it above function find message by ID. We'll pass in just the ID of the message itself. And then this is a lot easier. Return DB messages. That's the table. Dot where ID equals the ID. Same thing. And then we return the first record it comes to. And so now that we got this kind of handy little helper file written, we can return find message by ID. I hope I didn't go too quick. Let me explain this real quick. Where we have a function called add message. We're going to pass a JSON object, and we're going to pass a lesson ID from the rec.params on the URL on up in the URL line. We're going to pull that lesson ID off, and we're going to add it to the message, and then we're going to say const ID equals. We're going to do an asynchronous hit of this table, and we're going to say return where the lesson ID equals the lesson ID, and then insert the message. And then after we inserted the message, we're going to instantly call the database again and say, now that we've added it, it should have an ID. Let's go look and see if we can actually find that ID that we just added. It should be in there. And if it's in there, it'll pass that entire record back. So let's save that. And now let's go to our index file and write our endpoint. And the endpoint is going to be server.post. We're going to hit API /API. You always got to put a slash in front. /API /lessons, because a message is actually a part of a lesson, right? So lessons, and then you're going to stick the ID of the lesson, and then messages. So when the user goes into, for instance, localhost 5000 /API /lessons /1, maybe for lesson 1 /messages, that's how we're going to add a message to this lesson ID. And that's how we link them up. And then we're going to pass our homies, rec and res. So first, let's deconstruct our ID from the rec.params. ID equals rec.params. And now let's get our body. We'll call it a message. This is the JSON object we're going to pass in. It contains the body of the message equals rec.body. And so one of the things that we have to do is somehow get the ID off of here into this message body. Now, sometimes the client will, when they're sending the JSON object, for instance, if we go to Insomnia, we're gonna insert a JSON object that looks like this: sender, my name, Brett, and then I think what's the two name of the field? It's sender and text, and then lesson ID. So if we go back to, let's close some of these. Let's close notes index. Here we go. So the text, and then maybe the text would be I think this class is too hard. I don't know. Maybe that's the message. If the client is going to send the lesson ID and put the right lesson in there, then we're good to go. But sometimes the client won't stick the lesson ID in there. And so we have to find some way of getting this lesson ID off of here and into this JSON object. And so I'm going to show you how to do that because it's a slightly more difficult of the two. I think that it's best if I show you how to do both, and that way you'll be armed, so you won't be stuck. So anyway, this is I'm gonna delete that. So one of the ways to check is now this is just a regular JavaScript object here. So this is a JavaScript object, and so what we can do is we can simply say if message dot lesson ID if it doesn't exist, if not message dot lesson ID, then let's add it. And now that we have the ID deconstructed, we can add this to this object. And it's just, pure JavaScript, so we can just say then if this field isn't a part of that object already, let's add it to it. So we can just say message using bracket notation, message lesson ID equals. Now, when we deconstructed this off of this URL, it comes in as a string. So we have to turn this into an integer because if you remember, we required it to be an integer. Keys have to be integers. So we got to make it an integer, but that's easy to do. We just use parseInt. So we parse int, and we pass in the ID and what base 10. And you can look at MDN. Just do MDN parseInt in a search engine, and it'll take you right to show you how to use this. But basically what we're doing is we're saying pull this ID out of here, which is a string, and turn it into an integer, and then assign it to this key value pair, this key in this object. So now after we run this, we're saying, hey, if lesson ID doesn't already exist there, then let's add it. All right, hopefully that's clear. So now we need to check if the lesson ID is valid. What if the lesson ID that somebody entered on the URL is an invalid number? So we need to check first of all that lesson exists at all. So we can just use our old lessons dot find by ID and just look for that lesson real quick and see if the lesson with this ID exists. Find by ID, pass in the ID, dot then lesson. And so if it's not a lesson, if after performing this find by ID and passing in this ID, and then it passes in the result into here, and if it doesn't find it, then we can say res.status 404, right? Because it's not found. .json, and then do our old typical invalid ID. We can just say invalid ID. But if it does, well, we don't even need to really put enough an else on here. We can just say if after running this, if it doesn't find it, then return that. Let's throw a catch on here because I always like When you do a dot then, always throw a dot catch on the end in case there's some sort of problem even running this at all. So let's just do a catch error, and we'll just say res.status of 500.json message, and then error finding lesson, something like that. Okay, so that's kind of the first check. We still haven't added a message yet. All we've done so far is we've said, hey, first check and see if the ID has been included in the rec.body or not. If it hasn't been included in the rec.body by the client or whoever made the JSON, then right here, code says, then add the ID to it. So we have all the information we need to successfully add a record. Then we're saying, okay, now that we've done that, let's first just check and see if this ID exists. And if it doesn't, then we just return our response. Now we can, after this, after the lesson, let me see, I want to make sure I get these in the right, outside of that, there we go. Then lesson, so now we need to check if there's all required fields, because we made the sender field not nullable, and we made the text field not nullable. These can't be left blank. And so we need to make sure, once again, that this rec.body contains both of those fields as well. And we can do something kind of like what we did right here, right down here. So let's write a note here. Check for all required fields. And I guess we could have moved this down into there. Doesn't really matter. And let's say if not message.sender or not message.text. So if it's missing either one of those, then we need to return back res.status of, I think the proper code is 400 for missing information. I don't know. You can Google it. JSON message. Let's say must provide both sender and text. Let's capitalize that. Sender and text values. All right. And let me see. I think that looks good. And then if that passes, then we can add the message. And I'm just trying to figure out make sure that I have it nested properly. You see, text values, and to that, and to that. Yep, and then right after that. So right in here. All right, good. All right, so now we've done our checks. We've checked to make sure that the ID is there. We've checked to make sure that it's a valid ID altogether. We've checked to make sure that required fields that aren't supposed to be null are there. Now, if the code makes it all the way down to here, to line 101 here, now we're in a position to add our message. So lessons dot, and what do we call? We called it add message. Let's highlight that. Lessons dot add message, and we're passing it the message What's the DB want? It wants the message and the lesson ID. So we're going to pass it the message and the ID, which is the lesson ID, which we got right here. And so now we can do a whole new dot then message and let's throw our dot catch on at the end. Dot catch error and then res dot status of 500 dot JSON with a message of failed to add message, some kind of error. So now in here in our dot then, we're going to say, notice that it returns out of here the find by message ID. It'll return the entire brand new message that we just added. It's going to return it. And so if that's not null, so we can say if message, if this isn't null, that means it added it. If message, now we can say res.status of 200 dot JSON and return the message. Finally. And then we have our catch down there, and I think we're good. All right, just making sure that this looks good. All right, let's save this. Let's test it out. Let's give it a test drive. Since we reran our migrations, our database is completely blank, so we're going to have to go to Insomnia and enter some new messages, or some new lessons. So post. So let's start with algebra beginning. Let's make it not algebra. Let's make it like CSS beginning. CSS is a deep ocean all unto itself. So let's add that. Oh, I forgot to rerun the server, didn't I? Let's start the server. Yarn server. Get the server running. All right, now let's go back to Insomnia. All right, this is a lesson. Boom, we got one lesson added. Let's enter CSS Intermediate and CSS Advanced. Good. Now if I do a get, I should get all those three. Boom, I got all those three. Now let's add a new message. Here, let me delete this one so I can do it in front of you. So we're going to say new request, which is add message. It's a post, and we are including a body, a JSON. Create. Let me go grab the URL off of here. Copy that. Go to our add message. Paste this in here. Lessons, and it wants. So which one of these are we going to add a message to? Let's add one to the first one with an ID of 1. All right, so let's go to add messages. We're going to add a message to lesson number 1. And then we have to put messages on the end because that's how we wrote our endpoint, right? We wrote our endpoint for this URL. All right. But now we have to stick a body, and the fields are, what are they again? They're sender. Let me see. Sender and text. All right. So sender, I'll just say it's me. text is CSS is a deep ocean. And we don't need to include, we could, if we wanted to, we could include lesson ID in the body of the JSON. See, the JSON is going to be coming from your client side ideally. Right now we're using Insomnia or Postman to mock up an object that would actually be coming from your client. Your client meaning Vue or React or Angular or whatever. And so they're going to be probably collecting this information via a form, and they're going to have a form with inputs, and the user types information into a form, and it gathers the information from that form, puts it into an object, and then it's called an Axios dot, and it hits our backend API, and then hopefully it's in the right shape. So they might give us the lesson ID. So let's give it a lesson ID of 1, and let's add one this way, and then let's add another one where we don't add a lesson ID and see if it actually properly pulls it off of this all on its own. But for right now, let's add 1 and just see if it works. Cross our fingers. Boom, it added it. Beautiful. Now if I do, well, we have to write our get messages in the next lesson, which is going to be way easier than what we just did right now. Now let's add another one. Let's add one and say this one is from Greg. And Greg, I like swimming with sharks anyway. Also for lesson 1. And let's leave off the lesson ID. Our code right here should kick in and take care of that. So let's make sure that does that. Boom, and it does. Beautiful. And now we got this, and it returned back the ID. See, the ID of the message itself is 2, but it's connected to the foreign key of 1. Excellent. That was kind of a complicated lesson. This by far has been the most comprehensive endpoint we've written right here. Kind of a lot. We both passed in a parameter and a body. We did a lot of error checking to make sure, make sure this foreign key value gets put in, and let's check if it isn't in the body, and then let's add it. Then let's check and see if it's a valid lesson. And then, let's check and make sure required fields are there. And if you were able to follow so far and get this done, great job, because this, the coding boot camp that I went to, they never really went into how to add a record to a child table. They showed us how to get records from it, but not really how to add. So this is kind of about as hard as it gets when it comes to writing endpoints, writing an endpoint that adds a value to a child table. So if you were able to follow along, great job. If not, please put comments in the YouTube. I answer those. I answer all of them, and I look forward to your comments. And the next lesson, we're going to then write our endpoints to get a message, to get all the messages for a lesson, to get an individual message, and to delete a message. Mm-hmm. And then after that, we're going to go on to routing, and then we'll do a lesson after routing on how to deploy to Heroku, and that's going to be its own thing. And that was recently requested by somebody, so we're going to be moving in that direction. All right, I look forward to having you along in the next video, and thank you for following along.